There is a database in my office that I have to log into to access any recordings that is requested.
All right. Sometimes do calls from another county, such as Colleton County, come into Hampton County?
They do.
And why does that happen?
Cell phones pick up on the nearest PSAP based upon the location of that cell phone at the time of call. PSAP meaning Public Safety Answering System.
Okay. And why does it pick up on that on the location and send it to Hampton as opposed to Colleton?
Due to the geographical location of a phone call or a phone when that call is made, that cell phone picks up at that tower, and the tower, wherever the nearest PSAP is where that cell phone will be routed to.
And what do you do when you in Hampton County receive a call from Colleton that's supposed to be going to Colleton County?
We transfer that call out to Colleton County.
Okay. All right. Back on June 7th of 2021, did you receive a call from Alec Murdaugh?
We did.
And that call came into Hampton County, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what did happen to that call when it came in?
Once it was determined that the call was the location of the emergency was Colleton County, we transferred that call out to Colleton County.
And you determined the Colleton County location how?
Based upon the numerics and the address that was given. Once we plug that information into our system, it populates in Colleton County.
Well, the record reflect I'm showing the witness takes what's marked as takes Exhibit 9.
States Exhibit 9 is admitted without objection.
States Exhibit 9 is a disc. Can you tell us what is on that disc?
The initial 911 call that came in on the night in question.
And how do you know that call is on that disc?
I was able to listen to it, and I dated it and initialed on the 23rd of January.
Your Honor, at this time the state would move Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Already been admitted without objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
My wife and child was stuck there. Okay, you said 4147 Mobile Road in Allison? Sir? You said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison? Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road. Stay on the line with me, okay? Yes, sir. Stay on the line with me, okay? Hello? I'm still here. Stay on the line. I'm still here, okay? Colleton, I have an Alex Murdaugh on the line calling from 4147 Moselle Road. He's advising that his wife and child was shot. Mr. Murdaugh, go ahead and talk to Colleton. It's 4147 Moselle Road. I've been up to it now. It's bad. How did they shoot? Did they shoot themselves? Oh, no. Hell no.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Are they in a vehicle?
rentals. I can tell that.
And did
I
you
can
see
tell that he's
anyone?
shot in the head, and he's shot really bad. He's shot really bad.
The state has no further questions for this witness.
By the defense. Cross-examination.
Thank you for your indulgence. Just a couple of questions, Your Honor. So explain to me how this works. A call came into you in what county?
Hampton County.
Hampton County.
Correct.
And how, when you dial 911, how does it determine what county to send it to?
When you dial 911, the cell phone company picks up that it's a 911 call being placed. They hit the nearest cell phone tower, and based upon the location of that cell phone tower, is routed to the nearest PSAP, or Public Safety Answering System.
Okay, so the nearest cell phone tower to Moselle would
Was
be?
Walterboro Highway Tower.
Okay. And you're from Hampton?
I am.
That's not you on the phone, is it?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you know the Murdaughs, or do you know Alec Murdaugh and his family?
Not too much, yes. I mean, a little bit, but.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything further? You may step down. Thank you. Now call your next witness.
Angela Stallings.
You affirm the testimony about to give the court shall be the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Take a seat. State your name again for the record. Spell your last name.
Angela Stallings, Stallings.
Hi, Captain Stallings.
Good afternoon.
Could you please tell the jury where you work?
I work at the Colleton County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. And how long have you worked there?
I have approximately 15 years with the Sheriff's Office.
What are some of your duties and responsibilities at the Sheriff's Office?
I am the Administrative Services Captain. I oversee the 911 Center. I'm over our Civil Process Division, Court Security, our School Resource Officers, our Sex Offender Registry Division, training, supply, and the hiring process, and records.
You have quite a lot of duties there.
Yes, ma'am.
In the course of your duties, do you keep records of 911 calls?
We do.
Can you explain to the jury what happens when a 911 call comes into Colleton County?
Yes, ma'am. So when a call comes into Colleton County, it hits our recorder system. As soon as the call connects to the recorder and starts ringing, our recorder automatically starts recording automatically. It starts recording before we even answer the phone.
And is a recording of all 911 calls that come into Colleton County Center kept?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
And how are those records kept?
They're kept on our server that is the Carolina recording software system that we use.
Who has access to those records?
Myself and one other employee.
Is it normal for y'all to have calls routed from Hampton County to Colleton County?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And why does that happen?
Depending on the location of the call within the county, we border several counties. Depending on if it's a cell phone that is calling 911, depending on the closest available cell tower, it will hit that tower. Wherever that tower is located, it routes to that PSAP.
All right. On June 7th of 2021, did Colleton County receive a transferred 911 call from Hampton County?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
And what time did that call come in?
May I look at my notes?
Yes.
That call came in at 22:07:09, which is 10:07:09 p.m.
And the notes you're referencing up there, is that some kind of report that's generated when the call comes in, or what are you looking at?
Yes, ma'am. This is a report that's generated through our recorder software.
Okay. So you received a call from 10:07 p.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Who was that call from?
Hampton County.
Okay. And who was the caller?
The caller was Alex Murdaugh.
I'm showing you State's Exhibit 11. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 11?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
What is it?
It is a disc of the 911 call.
And how do you know that?
It has my initials and date that I reviewed it.
And this is a true and accurate depiction of the 911 call made by Alex Murdaugh.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Your Honor, at this time I've moved State's Exhibit 11 into evidence.
Okay, Your Honor.
Submitted without objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
June. June 7th, 2021, 22 hours, 7 minutes, 9 seconds.
Colleton Vacation. Okay, and sir, give me the address again.
It's 4147 Murdaugh Road. I've been up to it now. It's bad.
Okay. How did they shoot? Did they shoot themselves?
Oh no, hell no.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Are they in a vehicle?
No, ma'am, they're on the ground out at my kennel.
Okay, so what is her name?
Maggie and Paul.
Maggie is her name?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. When's the last time you talked to Maggie?
Hour and a half ago, probably 2 hours ago.
What? Okay, you said about 2 hours ago you talked to them?
Approximately, yes, ma'am, approximately.
Okay, did she say what they were doing at all?
No, I talked to her in person.
You talked to her in person? We're getting somebody out there too. We ask to give you questions, don't slow them down, okay? And you sure they're not breathing? Is he moving at all, your son? I know you said that she was shot in the head, but what about your son?
Nobody. They're not. They're going over to them.
What is your telephone number?
942-1227. I'm going back to my house just to get a gun just in case. I'm about 100 yards from my house.
And did anything look out of place?
Not particularly, really, no ma'am.
Okay. Look, I know you're upset, Mr. Murdaugh, but I don't want you to get a gun and have a gun out whenever my officers get there, okay?
I will not do that. He's been being threatened by my son out of both sex. He's been being threatened for months and months and months. He's been hit several times and he's just finally
Do you know who was threatening your son?
it's too many people. That's oh, son. One second.
And you don't know the name of who was threatening him at all?
My son knows. My son knows.
Your son knows who was threatening him?
I have another son now.
Okay.
All right, I'm going back down there.
And Captain Stallings, there's a break between parts in this call. Why is that?
The way our recorder system is set up, if there is a pause with either the call taker or the caller not talking, the recorder automatically cuts off. As soon as it starts to hear someone talking, it automatically kicks back on and starts recording.
June 7th, 2021, 22 hours, 13 minutes, 58 seconds.
Yes, they've been around with you ever since you got on the phone with me. I have multiple people coming out there to you. can you do me a favor, Mr. Murdaugh, and turn on the flashers on your car so that way they can see where the kennels are? Do you have your flashers on for me, Mr. Murdaugh? Okay. I don't want you to touch them at all, okay? I don't know if you've already touched them, but I don't want you to touch them just in case they can get any kind of evidence, okay?
I already touched them trying to get a to see if they were breathing.
Okay. Well, I just don't want you to move anything just in case they can get any kind of evidence, okay? Okay, and did your son, I know you said that he had been threatened, did your son make report to this at all?
Yes, ma'am.
He did? And what's your son's name?
Paul,
Paul?
dude, I want to call. I need to call some of my family.
Okay. Well, do me a favor for me. Whenever you see the officer or the medics, because they're all coming to you, can you put your gun in your vehicle for me?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we have them come and turn on the flashers on your vehicle so they can see you, okay? You got the flashers on for me? Okay. All right. Just, whenever you see them, put your gun up for me, okay?
Okay.
How old is your son?
22.
Okay. All right. We're getting them out there to you, okay? All right.
Thank you, Captain Stallings. The state has no further questions.
Yes, ma'am.
No question, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. Call your next witness.
Barry McCoy.
Hello. Raise your right hand, left hand on the Bible. You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give the court shall be the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Take a seat in the witness stand. State your name again for the record. Spell your last name.
Barry McCroy, McCroy.
Chief McCroy, could you please tell the jurors where you work?
Work for Colleton County Fire and Rescue.
And what is your position?
I'm the fire chief.
The fire chief of Colleton County Fire and Rescue?
That is correct.
And how long have you worked at Colleton County Fire and Rescue?
29 years.
And about how many scenes do you think you have responded to over the years?
I have no idea. Many thousand.
What are some of the training that you need to do to be a paramedic or respond with fire and rescue?
Well, that has changed greatly over the years, but presently, to be a paramedic, you have to have been an EMT for, we recommend 2 years, which that's about a 500-hour course, and then you take a paramedic course, which is about 1,500 hours. In Colleton County, we require people to be cross-trained, so they have a 500-hour firefighter course as well.
And are you yourself a paramedic?
I am.
And how long have you been a paramedic?
Since 1981.
What are would be the normal procedures when responding to a gunshot, to treat gunshot wounds or to a shooting?
Well, when initially respond, the law enforcement that's responsible for that jurisdiction typically clears the scene to make sure that it's safe for the other responders. When we arrive, we want to evaluate the patients to make sure that if they've got some injuries that we can treat, we treat them, and we transport them to the closest trauma center.
So if someone has been shot, what would you normally do to initially treat that person?
We would control their bleeding, protect their airway, get them transported as quickly as possible. It may involve starting IVs. In Colleton County, we carry blood, so we could administer blood to the patient if they required it.
Did you respond to Moselle Road on June 7th of 2021?
I did.
And tell us about what you did when you got there.
I was on my way home from work, and I heard the Sheriff's Department on their radio dispatch units to the address in question, and they advised that there was 2 people shot. Shortly thereafter, they dispatched fire rescue units, and we have a standard protocol of what they send. There were multiple patients, so they dispatched 2 ambulances and put a helicopter on standby, and then a supervisor is also dispatched. We also send the closest fire station, which in that case was the one from Islandton. I responded from Walterboro, and I did arrive ahead of everybody else. Dispatch had told us not to go onto the scene, so I staged about the 3900 block. And a few minutes later, a deputy passed me, and I went in behind the deputy, which was Mr. Green that y'all listened to earlier.
And what did you see when you were driving onto the scene?
It was really dark. Had a long dirt driveway, and when we arrived, there was some kennels off to the left, and like a big barn with a 3-lane lean-to on the right-hand side.
I'm going to show you what's been marked. It states exhibits 51, 49, 24, and 21. I just ask you to take a look at these pictures and tell me, are you familiar with those pictures?
Yes, ma'am. This does appear to be the accident scene.
And these are true and accurate depictions of the crime scene that night?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, this time I would move states 51, 49, 24, and 21 into evidence, with states exhibits 24 and 51 being sealed with the agreed upon placeholders.
No objection.
You're admitted without objection.
So, Chief McCoy, could you tell us how you observed the victims when you got to the scene?
Deputy Green went through the scene first. He actually drove a little ways in between the kennels and the lean-to. It was very dark. so he needed his headlights to see what was going on there. There was animals in the kennels. I don't know how many, but there was also some chickens fluttering around on the equipment on the right-hand side. The body of a younger male subject was face down by the kennels. He had some very severe injuries to the head. And there was a female subject at the end of the lean-to. She was also face down with severe injuries to her head. And there was a gentleman standing off a little distance away from it, and he was on a cell phone and seemed very upset.
Did you recognize that gentleman?
Yes, ma'am.
And who was that?
Alex Murdaugh.
And how did you recognize him?
I have met him in the past on a professional basis because we have had to do depositions and such with his law firm.
Case Exhibit 21. Can you describe what the jury is looking at in this picture?
On the left-hand side of the photograph is the covered body of Paul Murdaugh, and the down towards the end of the lean-to is you can see the covered body of Miss Maggie Murdaugh.
And those bodies appear to be covered with pink sheets.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, were those sheets there when you got there?
No, ma'am. We got those off the ambulance and covered up the bodies.
And why did you do that?
We typically do it to, to shield the bodies from the view of the public. There were a lot of people showing up there. The family was on the scene, and people just really don't need to see that.
Case Exhibit 24. Please describe what the jury's viewing.
That is the body of Paul, and he is laying face down at the entrance to, there's like a little utility room at the kennels. He is laying down with, you can see there's substantial damage to his head with a lot of blood around his head and brain down there around his ankles.
And this is how you found Paul.
That is correct.
Okay. And you said that appears to be his brain down there by his foot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at this point, did you check his pulse?
I did not check his pulse. He and his mother both had injuries that we consider incompatible with life. There was a lot of coagulation there where the blood had congealed, and they were not currently bleeding, which would indicate they did not have a heartbeat. And obviously, with his type of injuries, he, it's not any way you could sustain his life.
And it's Case Exhibit 51.
That is Miss Maggie, and she also had severe injuries to her head. You can also see the congealed blood around the bottom where her face is, and she had a hole in her head to where you could actually see inside of her head cavity. Was
it necessary to check Mrs. Murdaugh's pulse or perform any life-saving treatment?
No, ma'am. And she also had injuries that were not sustainable.
It's Case Exhibit 49. That's just where.
That's the lean-to, and that's Miss Maggie's body in front of the little side-by-side.
Thank you. I have no further questions for this witness at this time.
Cross-examination.
Thank you for the indulgence. One moment. Chief of the Coffee County Fire Rescue, correct?
That is correct.
And you, in the past, have had dealings with Alex Murdaugh in a professional capacity with his law firm, correct?
That is correct.
So you recognized him, and you've seen him before, correct?
Yes, sir.
Was his demeanor grieving, distraught, upset?
He seemed to be very upset, yes, sir.
Very upset. Now, I've got just a very few questions for you. But when you responded, and I'm going to try to get the picture, I think. Here we go. This is that good. So, do you recognize this from the night of June 7th?
That is correct.
And those headlights facing us, are those the headlights from the Suburban?
That would be a vehicle that was south of the location, so the police car would have been north.
Right, but is that Mr. Murdaugh's vehicle, or do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay. So when you got there, you indicated to somebody that they needed to preserve some tire tracks, correct?
That is correct. Over to the right-hand side, there's 3 rows of I guess where they could park equipment underneath the lean-to. And the farthest one over, there was no equipment in it, but there were some tire tracks coming out of it.
And, I mean, how did you come to see those? Did you drive? You drove in off of Moselle Road, correct?
I drove in off of Moselle Road. The deputy parked in this little driveway here between the kennel and the lean-to.
Right.
I parked at the end of the lean-to. Where I was at, I activated my scene lights, which are all the way across the front of the light bar.
The scene lights.
They're
high-intensity lights.
High-intensity, bright white lights.
Okay.
So it was very dark, and I could see the tire tracks over to the right.
So as we look... No signal. Like my television at home. Okay, so as you look at, stop it 1 second. No, go back the other way. Okay, back it up a little bit. From this perspective, can you see that perspective right there?
Yes, sir.
Hold on.
If you back up just a little bit,
Back it up.
right, if you'll stop it
Stop.
there,
Go back.
you can
Stop.
see the workshop on the left.
How about do this? How about step down here, please? So we all are singing from the same sheet of music. If you'd stand over that way so these jurors can see.
There's a workshop right here,
Uh-huh.
and there's a row here,
Uh-huh.
a row here, and a row here. This row is where the tire tracks were.
And the crime scene is where?
Right here is where Miss Maggie's body is, and that's Paul's body.
Okay. And how far is it from where you saw those tire tracks to where their bodies were, approximately?
20, 30 feet.
20 or 30 feet. And you saw, now this was gravel, grass, dirt,
Kind of sandy.
sandy, but distinct tire tracks.
Yes, sir. Like
And-
one pair of tire tracks.
One pair. Okay. And you couldn't tell which direction they were going in, or I mean,
Could have been coming in, could have been going out.
you're not a tire expert, are you?
No, sir.
Track. Okay. Go ahead and have a seat.
Thank you.
So, whose attention did you bring that to?
Brought it to the attention of one of the deputies. I don't recall which one.
Was it Green, Deputy Green?
I don't recall.
But one of the Colleton County deputies.
Yes, sir.
And you indicated to him that it needed to be preserved, needed to be roped off, needed what?
I showed them to him and told him, I said, hey, there's some tire tracks over there. We tried to block off the driveway. I had one of our units stay out on Moselle Road, but a lot of vehicles kept driving around them. There was civilian vehicles kept coming in, and then it began raining. So at that point,
So after you told, he didn't put any yellow tape up to block it?
No, sir. They had yellow tape in front of our vehicles where we were parked, but they didn't put any yellow tape down there.
And vehicles drove around your vehicle and just drove up and down that road?
Yes, sir.
Destroying the tire track?
Well, the ones that were on the road parked, not the ones under the shed.
Okay. But to your knowledge, while you were there, did anybody take any pictures of those tire tracks?
I have no idea. No, sir.
Okay. Did you see any other pieces of forensic evidence, if you will, while you were there, other than tire tracks?
There were shell casings around Miss Maggie's body.
Okay. Now,
Yes, sir.
did you go in the feed room?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you very careful around the body?
Yes, sir. And the sheriff's department started putting up the yellow tape, and as they did that we backed up and got behind it.
Take the court's indulgence. One final. Joe, I just need to go to another. No, it's right. Watch this video, and then I need to ask you a couple questions. Is this the area you were talking about where there were tire tracks?
They're over to the left.
I'm sorry?
They're over to the left.
Okay, but all these vehicles that are parked up there?
That's the driveway coming in.
Okay. And then you're saying after that is where these tire tracks were?
Yes, sir, over to the left of this police car. You can see my vehicle was the red and white Tahoe.
Right.
Maybe 15 feet to the left of that was where the tire tracks were.
And you pointed those out to the Colleton County Sheriff's deputy, said they needed to be preserved.
I just showed them to them. I didn't tell them what to do with them.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect. Well, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Call your next witness.
State calls Jason Chapman.
Thank you.
Lights on, or they turn them up? Lights back on, or halfway, or?
Do you affirm the testimony about to give the court shall be the truth, so help you God?
I do, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
a seat in the witness stand. State your name again for the record.
Yes, ma'am.
Spell your last name.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Walker Chapman. Last name Chapman. Mr. Chapman, Jason, you stated in the record, thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what education did you obtain? Sure. I'm a native, born in Walterboro. I've lived here most of my life.
graduated from what was Walterboro High School at the time. I attended the College of Charleston and the University of South Carolina, Salkehatchie. Before starting my career in law enforcement, I actually joined the cadet program well before age of 21, then became a reserve deputy, dispatcher, and then a Class 1 officer. And I've now been doing law enforcement. I'm in my 26th year.
26-year career. Would you walk us through how you when you first got into law enforcement and kind of the roles you've taken on and the training you've done in that?
Certainly. In '97, I attended a reserve officer class. It was a joint class between the Collins County Sheriff's Office and the Walterboro Police Department. I had to actually wait until I turned 21 to take the final exam. Went down to the academy, took the exam, passed, began working as a reserve. I then got hired as a dispatcher at the Walterboro Police Department, where I worked a short stint as a dispatcher to fill in a hole. And in the spring of '98, I attended the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy. I graduated later that year. I actually graduated as a distinguished graduate from the academy. Since then, I've been doing law enforcement. I did my first 16 years with the city of Walterboro. And I transferred over to the Sheriff's Office January 1 of 2013, where I have remained since then. My training I've worked through pretty much every division there is in law enforcement, probably with the exception of civil process. I have an extensive background in firearms. I'm a firearms instructor, less than lethal instructor, active shooter instructor. I've had training as a narcotics supervisor. I've been through schools for administration, pretty much everything.
What's your current rank with the Sheriff's Department?
Currently as captain.
And how would you describe your responsibilities presently?
So currently I oversee special operations. That includes our investigative division, our tactical team, search and rescue.
Have you ever had an opportunity to testify as an expert in a trial?
I have.
Tell us about that.
This past year in 2022, I testified in federal court in Charleston, South Carolina, on a case involving the city of Beaufort, and I was sworn in as a expert witness in general police procedures.
I'm going to direct your attention back to the date of June 7, 2021. Are you familiar with that day?
Yes, sir.
What was your role with the Sheriff's Office back on that date?
The same as it is currently.
Supervising investigations?
That's correct.
Now would that include homicides?
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you have an opportunity, were you dispatched or were you noticed of an incident that occurred on that day?
I was. I actually heard the call and went in service before I was dispatched, but yes, sir.
All right. What did you hear over the radio?
Call coming out that a transfer from Hampton County had been received, in which the caller was reporting that his wife and child had been shot.
Did you know a location at that point?
I was given the location by dispatch, but I was not familiar at the time of the dispatch as to the parties involved.
And at that point, did you decide that you were going to go to the scene?
I did, sir.
What was the dispatch location?
I believe it was, I think it's 4142 Moselle Road in Arlington.
Were you made aware of who this involved at that
I
point?
was not at the time.
Is 4147 Moselle Road within the limits of Colleton County?
It is, sir.
And walk us through what you did that night upon, learning of this incident and then making your way out there. Walk us through that process, if you would.
Yes, sir. I had a brief conversation with Sheriff Hill by telephone while en route. He had been advised of the caller's identity as Mr. Alex Murdaugh. With my career, familiar with the Murdaugh family and Mr. Murdaugh, and Sheriff Hill advised me that if it was in fact confirmed to be Mr. Murdaugh, that he would likely notify SLED simply because of the conflict of interest with the family. And shortly before we arrived, I believe he was able to confirm that, and that call was made to request for assistance from SLED and to request that they actually assume primary in the investigation.
Does your department, the sheriff's office, do you all work fairly closely with SLED? Is that a common thing?
We do, sir.
All right, describe that process. I mean, not including this particular investigation, but in general, how have you all worked with SLED as a law enforcement agency?
As far as crime scenes, like response to crime scenes, my division works with the entire agency, but we work very well with SLED. The remote location, although we have a satellite office for SLED here in Colleton County, actually, for the Low Country, their crime scene unit still comes out of Columbia. So, middle of the night when they're notified that we may need assistance, or in this case that we wanted to take them to take primary in the investigation, even with the fact that they're emergency services, it's still going to be about an average of a 2-hour response for that crime scene unit once they're notified. So it's very common for us to begin the investigative process at that scene while we're waiting for their arrival, with them working jointly with us. And that investigative process usually begins with the acquisition of a search warrant, which we know will be required once the crime scene team arrives on scene. And that just comes from a long supported tradition of us working well together and obviously being capable to do so.
As a captain and as a supervisor of the investigations, do you typically wear a body-worn camera?
I do have one. At that particular night, I did not have it. It's on my my exterior ballistic vest, and the scene was secure prior to my arrival, so I did not have my vest on.
On arrival at the scene, were you made aware, did you become aware of who in your department had already arrived?
I was listening to the radio so that I knew that several patrol units had arrived prior to myself. And I believe myself, the sheriff, and one other detective arrived probably about 10, 12, 13 minutes after the initial officers.
Do you remember the rough approximate time that you arrived on scene?
I want to say it was around 10:35, 10:37 p.m. that evening.
Walk us through what you observed upon arrival.
Sure. So while en route, I reminded the shift supervisor, Sergeant Daniel Green, that to try to maintain the integrity of the scene as best as possible. I wasn't there, so I didn't know the magnitude of the scene. I don't know what he has, but just reminding him, limit personnel inside the scene, do what we can to preserve. Sheriff Hill came across the radio. I was trying to pull the weather up. In this particular area I was driving through, I did not have much phone signal, so he did, and realized that we had an approaching storm that was about 45 minutes out. So he advised over the radio, once he got his phone to pick it up, that we needed to secure a tent. I had not been there yet. He was requesting the tent to place over the deceased bodies of the two victims. I relayed that information to one of my lieutenants that was en route. I also turned one of my detectives around that has the longest drive in, which is Detective Rutland, and I informed her to head to the office to start working on a search warrant.
Is that your common practice?
Yes, sir.
You spoke before about you all conducted joint investigations with SLED. Is it common describe for us what your roles might be in a joint investigation and what SLED's role might be and how that, played out in this case?
Certainly. So the very first thing, obviously, is a notification for a request for assistance, and then the explanation of what exactly we're requesting. A lot of times our assistance is, what's requested is nothing more than assistance with the crime scene. Sometimes it may be that we're asking for them to take the entire case. In this case, the notification was made by the sheriff. All I was told was that SLED was responding, that they were sending a team of investigators as well as crime scene. Knowing that crime scene was en route, we went ahead and secured that search warrant. That's why Detective Rutland was turned around and sent directly to the office to go ahead and initiate that process. Obviously, at 10:30 at night, we knew that we were going to have to get the warrant typed, and then we were going to have to locate a judge in the middle of the evening. We wanted to have all of that done prior to the arrival of the crime scene unit.
And you touched on earlier a little bit about the weather, but describe the weather as it was when you arrived that evening.
As I arrived, hot, sticky, I recorded in my notes. It's the only reason I can go back and tell you exactly, but what I have recorded in my notes is 79 degrees, 89% humidity, hot, sticky. It was not raining yet. An occasional raindrop on the windshield, but no actual rain yet. It was a little foggy on my ride in, but not foggy at the scene. And obviously evening hours.
And I think you mentioned before, but rain did set in at however, how long was it until the rain set
It
in?
wasn't very long. I think the radar was pretty accurate. I want to say within 45 minutes to an hour of that notification, the rain did come.
And you mentioned setting up tents or requesting that tents be set up. What would be the purpose of those tents?
So in response to the crime scene, obviously preservation of any type of evidence is important, but the preservation is not always limited to leaving it there and taking a picture of it and wait for somebody else to get there. In this case, Mother Nature wasn't complying. We knew that the rain was inbound. So the tent was placed over victim Maggie's body in an attempt to preserve any evidence that may be there. I only had one at the time. Paul's body was positioned somewhat over an extending ledge that I was hopeful would keep some of the rain if it did start off of him. The other evidence would have been anything from, and at the time I didn't know what we were going to be facing, but from, tire tread, footprints, shell casings, anything at all. So the intent would be to preserve that as best as possible. And if it was going to be affected by the approaching weather, do the best thing we could to mark it out, measure it out, and have that done or partially done by the time crime scene arrived.
As far as safety purposes, when you arrived on the scene, would you have considered the scene to be secured at that point?
I arrived pretty quick. I know that as far as the immediate, right there, the area that I'm sure that you ladies and gentlemen have seen with the tape and the videos that were played earlier, the immediate scene, yes, the outside, the property's approximately like 1,700 acres, and it's not just that property. It sits in the middle of nowhere. At the time, we did not know what we had. I don't know if we had a active shooter, didn't know if we had a murder-suicide, didn't know if we had people in the woods. We don't have any idea. So inner perimeter secure, I would say yes, sir. Outside, in the woods, across the street, I wasn't sure yet. I didn't know.
Is it fair to say that there was a lot of unknowns at that point when you first arrived?
A lot of unknowns when I first arrived. Very little known other than at the time what they had gotten as initial information from Mr. Murdaugh and the fact that we had 2 deceased.
Tell the jury, if you will, well, first of all, let me ask you this. As part of your law enforcement training throughout the years, have you had any experience with or training in, life-saving techniques, if needed, if someone needed CPR or something like that? Are you trained in it?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And arrival on the scene, did you physically observe the 2 bodies that were present, both of Maggie and Paul?
I did, sir.
And in your estimation, was it clear to you that they were deceased?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Did you consider that life-saving techniques would be possible or would have any result?
I did not. Paramedics were there shortly before me. Got great fire rescue. I was assured that if there had been anything that could have been done, it would have been initiated prior to my arrival. But from what I saw, it was well beyond that.
Upon your arrival at the scene, were there anyone else present that were not either sheriff's office employees or employees of EMS and fire? Was there anyone else present on the scene?
The 2 victims, Mr. Murdaugh and emergency services.
And you mentioned Mr. Murdaugh. Is that Alex Murdaugh?
Yes, sir.
Is he present here today?
Yes, sir. He's seated at the defense table, blue blazer, white shirt, and glasses.
Did you have an opportunity to observe Mr. Murdaugh that night?
I did, sir.
As part of your responsibilities there, what capacity were you there at the scene? In what capacity?
Again, investigative. I realized that, we had notified SLED to take over, but again, what we were attempting to do and what we did do was identification of any potential evidence. We marked that potential evidence. If time had allowed, it would have been photographed, and then from that point simply protected. Absolutely zero collection of anything was done by any of my staff, with the exception of one GSR kit that was instructed by SLED.
I know, have you familiarized yourself with the body-worn video of both Deputies Green and McDowell?
I did, sir.
And what was your first order of business upon arrival, particularly relating to Paul?
By the time I got there, they had placed a sheet over both of the victims. It's something that, I'm not always, I don't like. I understand that a lot of times it's placed there, so the family doesn't have to see that, but prefer that it does not happen. But in this case, it is already there. And because the scene is still somewhat fluid, we talked about the inner perimeter being secure, but as reported by Mr. Murdaugh, we don't know who the defendants are. We don't know where the shooters are. We see shell casings scattered around the ground that are obviously rifle casings. There's some evidence to support that at least one or more shots into Paul were from a shotgun. That means two weapons. So were there two people? Are there other people that may be injured? So inner perimeter may be considered secure, outer perimeter not so much. So we began really quick with an inspection of the two individuals to make sure that we had not missed a weapon, or that the initial responding officers had not missed one. And we could see that Maggie...
I wasn't until he told me.
Apologize. We could see that Maggie, there was nothing laying beside her. We looked closely. Again, we didn't move her. So we went over to Paul, and I had a couple of the deputies there and a detective lift the sheet just so that we could look and make sure there wasn't a weapon underneath him. His hands were tucked, so you couldn't see underneath his body. But as best we could tell from the present state of the body, unless there was a weapon directly underneath him, there was nothing out to left or right.
Captain Chapman, I'm going to direct your focus to the monitor in front of you. I'm going to play what's been marked as State's Exhibit. What's that? Oh, yeah, we need to do. State's Exhibit number 1.
Yes, sir.
Marked it to the 28-minute mark on that. Just looking at the still image right now, are you familiar with the scene there? And can you describe what's going on?
Yes, sir. So that's myself, Detective Tyndall, Chief McRoy from the Colleton County Fire Rescue. Lieutenant Lonnie Nettles in the background near the perimeter, inner perimeter tape. And victim Paul Murdaugh's body to our left there in the open doorway to the feed room.
What are you preparing to do here?
At this point in time, double checking to see if there is a weapon. Yeah, I told you before we weren't sure whether we're talking about a full murder, a murder-suicide, active shooter scenario. Are there other suspects that may be in the woods? We knew we had the casings that matched to a rifle with some evidence to support possibly a shotgun. So when asking if any other weapons had been found, everyone stated no. So I had them lift the sheet to make sure there wasn't the barrel of a gun or anything sticking out underneath the body.
A little bit about the scene here and your observations of what you're looking at. The kennels directly to the left. If I could direct your attention to those.
Yes, sir.
Did you notice animals in those kennels?
I believe in the 1, 2, 3. There's a couple kennels closest to the feed room that did have dogs in them. And possibly one towards the end. They weren't all full, but the ones closest to the feed room, I think there was a dog in at least 1 or 2 of them.
And was the area wet?
The area directly in front of the feed room was like wet. There was also water that tailed out of at least the first 2 kennels. The rest of the sidewalk was not wet. That water, I never saw a hose, so I'm not sure if it was leaking from something, but it was actually standing water.
And was that water present consistent with the weather at the time?
No, sir, it hadn't rained yet. Not enough to leave anything. It was a drizzle here and there.
When you observed the body of Paul, was it physically wet as well? For the clothing he was wearing?
He was saturated with obviously blood tissue, and his clothes did appear to be wet, but almost as if like absorbed from the ground up. Not saying that someone had sprayed him with a hose or anything.
Please observe the video if you would, and we'll have a few questions afterwards.
Hey, you want to close that in? Sir? Was that? You want to close it in?
Yeah.
So the guy, the other guy, whoever Eric is, or just a caller, there's a guy over here that's wanting to talk to him.
Don't even know who Eric is. I know Alex over there.
Alex.
Okay. There's a guy over here that wants to talk to him.
Yeah, but I don't know if you want me to tell him.
Did you direct Deputy McDowell into the feed room area to help with lifting of the sheet?
I did, sir.
And why would you do that?
I want the sheet lifted directly up, not drug across the body. Again, I told you I'm not really a proponent of sheets, but since it was there, I would prefer that it be lifted straight up. I had already walked through to see what, if anything, right there. You can see I'm cautiously stepping there, but I'd already checked to see if we were going to be able to step to the inside of it, the spot right inside the inside of the door, inside the door frame. I had looked, and I felt like he would be able to step straight in, pick the sheet up, put the sheet back down, and step back out.
And is preservation of a scene important?
It is important.
In your line of work?
Absolutely.
Is equally important securing the scene and making sure that you understand if there's any loose firearms around or that there's any other
It is. Again,
uncontrolled circumstances going on?
It is. Again, you know, the sole purpose of this right here is to help determine whether or not I have any suspects still on the move or if there's a weapon underneath him.
Thank you.
Well, the dad's over there. People just won't look. Fire rescue might have some more sheets we can steal.
That's why it shouldn't be about 5
Is this you looking for the gun?
It is, sir.
What do you notice about the body physically laid there of Paul's body?
Feet towards the feed room, head towards the driveway, hands tucked underneath the body, fairly saturated in blood. Majority of the head is gone. There's a lot of tissue, what appears to be at least some of the brain or most of the brain lying on the opposite side from me to the victim. Wet, again, I'm assuming probably from soaking up rain or water, whatever that is, off the sidewalk. And a smartphone sitting propped up on the back of him.
Was Paul's person saturated in physical matter and blood?
Yes.
His hands, were they accessible to anyone without, could you have touched Paul's hands or wrists without physically moving him?
I can't actually see his hands at this point in time.
Fell down on top of him? Is that
They're
fair to say?
underneath his body, yes, sir.
What did you observe that was laying on top of Paul's body right there?
Again, it was a smartphone.
Did you have a chance to examine that smartphone and get fairly close to it?
I got close to it. I didn't pick it up. I was present when it was actually collected later, but it was not collected at this point.
And later on, it was describe the collection process that occurred after this.
It was collected by myself and Agent David Owens. I believe he's going to be your case agent. As far as collection of that, I stood by as a witness as he collected. He had on rubber gloves. It was picked up. He didn't actually do any manipulation of the device in front of me. It was bagged as evidence and placed in the vehicle.
Was the phone physically bloody?
I don't recall any blood or water on the phone. I'm not saying that microscopically there wasn't, but I don't recall from the naked eye seeing anything.
That's what I'm asking about.
No, sir.
From your observations, was it wet from either water or blood?
No, sir.
And when it was lifted off of Paul's shorts, did it leave like a mark of blood or water or anything like that?
Not that I recall, no, sir.
I haven't asked the dad about the phone, but dad did say he came over and checked the pulses. Beyond that, I don't know what else he made. He did have a shotgun with him. I have secured that in my vehicle.
Were you able to locate a firearm underneath the body of Paul?
When the coroner's office arrived and the crime scene unit and victim Paul was eventually moved, there was not a firearm underneath.
Are you familiar with the rifle round called .300 Blackout?
I am, sir.
Is that in your 26 years of experience, is that a caliber that you've come across with any frequency?
In the last couple of years, probably more than ever, but in all the crime scenes that I've worked, I believe this was, at the time, the second ever in my career that had a .300 Blackout as far as being involved in a homicide.
As supervisor on the scene, is it part of your responsibility and your duties to sort of direct what people do? You're the person in charge?
It is, sir.
Does that free you up to do other things? If you have your deputies doing the tasks that you've assigned them?
If possible, yes, sir, sometimes.
And on this particular instance and this night, were you able to observe Mr. Murdaugh and see what he was up to?
Oh, yes, sir. I spoke to him on a few occasions.
whenever you're investigating a case, I'm going to ask you about items that you might designate as points that you need to address.
Yes, sir.
You describe what that might mean. What's in general like an investigative point or investigative cue that you need to focus on?
Anything that we hear or see that based on the limited amount of knowledge we have at that particular point just creates a unknown, something that may need further investigation, something that maybe doesn't necessarily correspond with the evidence on scene or with the statement made by somebody. It's something that just we need to follow up on. It can't just be left alone or accepted as fact.
What are some of the physical observations? I'm going to ask you about physical observations of Mr. Murdaugh. Did he appear to be, at least outwardly, did he appear to be upset?
Yes, sir, he did.
Were you close enough to observe whether or not he actually cried or had tears in his eyes?
He was upset, definitely upset. I got up to him, again, like I said, I spoke to him on at least 2 different occasions, and he was breathing hard. You know, his facial expressions were that of, torment. But did I physically see him crying? I did not. He was sweating, but he wasn't crying.
What did you observe about his clothing?
Clothing was clean. Didn't see anything that stuck out, and obviously no dirt or blood or anything that indicated he had been rolling around on the ground or that he had, been involved or anything up to that point.
I'm going to ask you about something you do when you're arriving on a scene, particularly if it's a homicide. Do you have a practice of phoning or having dispatch send you the 911 call?
Yes, we do.
Why would you do that?
We get a lot of information from 911 calls, more so than the average person, I think, would believe. And it's over the years, we've had several cases where had we not gone back and looked at that initial 911 call, we would have missed some very important information or information that could have cleared up some unknowns, those points of investigation you talked about much sooner. So in our investigative process, that's now one of the things that we try to do relatively quickly. In this case, with the scene being fluid and not knowing if we had suspects on the loose, I opted to go ahead and do that. And it took a minute for them to get caught up, as busy as they were, but they were able to get on the phone with me and play the 911 call for me.
So were you able to hear the 911 call?
I was.
And are you listening to that 911 call both for content but also critically and trying to examine the things that are said?
Oh, absolutely. We're listening for noises in the background, exactly what is said versus what we see, so forth.
So with that awareness of everything that was said on the 911 call, do you then take that information and apply it to the scene?
Yes, sir.
And are you applying that information to try to see if it checks out, to see if things are consistent with what you heard on the 911 call?
Yes, sir.
And on the 911 call, did Mr. Murdaugh indicate that he had tried to examine the bodies or check their pulses?
Yes, I believe dispatch stated, do not touch if you haven't. And Mr. Murdaugh replied that he had touched them, checking them.
To check and see if they're breathing?
And which would be expected, absolutely.
Upon examination, Mr. Murdaugh, did you have a chance to look at his hands?
Again, I did talk to him, yes, sir.
Did you have a chance to look at his shirt?
I did.
And did you see any indication that there was any blood on any part of his body?
No, sir. Not again, just physically with my observations, no microscope. I did not see any blood anywhere.
And in your experience with viewing Paul's body, had you physically touched Paul, would there have been blood left on your hands?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Response.
Physically saw the body, and he cannot testify to the locations that would be touched and whether it would transfer.
Does he know what location he touched?
I'll lay a foundation. I'll ask a few more questions. Yes, sir. Mr. Chapman, Captain Chapman, going back to your experience in life-saving procedures, are there common areas that someone might touch to check the pulse if they were indicating their check breathing?
Objection, Your Honor. The question is, where did Mr. Murdaugh touch the body for a pulse? Was it the neck?
Objections overruled. The prosecutor is asking the question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is there common areas that someone might check a body to check for, if they've indicated they're checking for breathing, are there common areas that someone might check?
I believe the most common is the neck and the wrist that you see that, you know, people with limited training would probably use. I'm sure there are others with medical training.
So the neck and the wrist. And please tell me where Paul's wrists were located when you discovered his body.
They're up underneath his body.
And was Paul's neck accessible? If his wrists were underneath his body, was his neck accessible?
I think you can get to portions of his neck. I don't know that you'd be able to get under. I mean, he's face down, and I didn't try to get a pulse, but where I know that you would check would be difficult without manipulating the body in some fashion, I guess.
And if you had to manipulate the body, and if you were going to try to check his pulse via wrists or neck, with what you saw that night, would your hands be bloody?
If I had attempted, they would have been, yes.
I'm going to ask you another investigative point that you observed. Did Mr. Murdaugh in the 911 call indicate he was going to retrieve a firearm?
Yes, sir. That actually came out while I was en route as a caution from the dispatcher, but it was also present on the call when I monitored the call.
Having listened to the phone call, having listened to the 911 tape, what was your reaction, or what was the cue that you were fixated on as it relates to the retrieval of the firearm? What is going through your head at that point?
Well, that he's scared. I mean, that he believes there may be somebody there that possibly whoever he believes hurt them may come back and hurt him.
And sure, that's your estimation, right? That's what you're thinking was going on.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. I mean, and that's what I believe pretty much anybody would think if he was there present with them and got spooked. And because I believe the verbiage on the 911 is, he states, I'm going to get a gun that I don't feel safe. And dispatch tries to tell him, we would rather you not. And you know, he states again that I'm not going to show it to the officers. I'm not going to hurt anybody. I'll put it away, but I feel unsafe. So I understand that.
All right, listen to the 911 call critically. What then did you observe towards the end after retrieving a firearm that you would cue on to in your investigative process?
After knowing that he had went and got the gun, knowing that he stated he was unsafe, and that he went and got the firearm, when he came back, as soon as he got back to the scene, the only thing I believe that was odd from that point was that he wanted to separate the call or cancel the call to call family prior to anyone's arrival. It was the only thing that just struck me as odd. Again, it's just a point of investigation. Up to that point in the phone call, he had asked repeatedly, where are they? Are y'all coming? Are y'all coming? Are y'all coming? I'm not safe. I'm going to go get a gun. And then when he got back to the scene, are y'all here yet? How far out are they? And then it was, I need to call my family, and the phone disconnected.
And when we refer to the scene is obviously, does that uncover part of what was, fenced off with crime scene tape? Does that, when we're referring to a scene?
That would have been the primary scene, yes, sir.
But in your mind, what does the scene also entail? What other things?
Well, I mean, the only thing that the phone could potentially extend that scene, the phone call, could potentially extend that scene as far as entering a crime scene and not being able to introduce evidence, or exiting a crime scene without being able to take away evidence. And by his own admission, he left the scene, went to his house, and got a gun. Potentially, that could make the house an extension of the crime scene.
Because that's what he indicated on the phone call.
And that's what he indicated.
Is Mr. Murdaugh considered part of that scene? The scene?
Of course. He's inside that area when we arrive, and I mean, he would be factored into everything. And
would that justify or explain why you might pay particular attention to him?
Sure. I mean, we would anybody that was there.
Now and I'm asking you this again, I know you've answered, but you've had a chance to review the body-worn camera from both Deputy Green and Murdaugh, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did your, after those videos cease recording because the crime scene had been secured, did you have an opportunity then to continue your investigation and continue your line of work?
We did.
And these activities would not have been captured on the video because it had been shut off. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you have an opportunity to physically observe, meaning watch Mr. Murdaugh while your deputies and your officers were performing their tasks?
I did.
What were a couple of the things that you noticed that stuck out to you when physically observing Mr. Murdaugh and how he was either behaving or what he was doing?
Again, I mean, he was emotional. Distress on his face. I didn't see him cry. Not everyone cries. I don't have an issue with that. There were times that when we got to certain places or asked certain questions that you could see a slight demeanor change or body language shift. And, you know, I took note of that, but again, just as a point of investigation. But he remained at the scene. He wasn't forced to say. He was cooperative, but he did, you know, there were times that you could see reaction to different things.
Okay. Did you notice a reaction? Did you ever notice him tracking your movements or your officers' movements?
I know when I was there when I ordered Detective Murdaugh to take a GSR kit and explain how the kit worked and why we were taking it, and he was very cooperative with giving the kit, and we really didn't have an issue there. Later, was looking at some, I wouldn't call them tire tracks, I'd call them tire impressions because there's no dirt there, it's just grass, but we noticed there was quite a bit of tire impressions that ran around the back side of the hangar.
And we'll get to the tire tracks in a second. You mentioned a term just a second ago called GSR.
Yes, sir.
If you wouldn't mind, could you explain to us just
sure.
What that is?
I apologize for that. So a gunshot residue kit is just a kit. We use specific kits provided by SLED because the kits are then sent off for testing, but it's meant to test for the presence of gunshot residue. They're very non-invasive. They have little ampules. You open up a sterile kit, put a set of gloves on, open the kit up, and you'll dab one of the sterile collectors around on the front and back of the hand of an individual, package those up, tape it off, seal it, date it, time it, case number, and then that's eventually sent off to SLED. We were asked, I spoke earlier and said the only thing that my detectives physically collected prior to SLED's crime scene's arrival was that GSR kit. It was done by us because there is a time limit on those. And you can't always wait. I know everybody sometimes thinks it's, well, why don't we just wait and do all this tomorrow? But GSR has a 6-hour limit on it. So we had to collect that night, and we did so. And that's what I was referring to when I say GSR, is a gunshot residue test kit.
And Captain Chapman, related to the GSR retrieval, I know you mentioned that time limit, the expiring time limit. Is it your understanding that time, does that time limit refer to humans or just things in general, objects in general?
That refers to when we collect a GSR sample from an individual. That is our restriction from the SLED lab, is that it has to be collected within 6 hours of the estimated time of firing the weapon. And again, that kit's, I mean, it's just as much for any type of exculpatory as it is conviction. We use it a lot of times to exonerate someone as much as we would to convict.
Going back to Mr. Murdaugh's observations that you had, did he appear to fixate on one body or the other that were there?
Especially watching the camera footage, I didn't notice quite as much in person, but later scrutinizing the body cam footage, he does appear to fixate more on his son than his wife, but that's in that limited amount of body cam footage that I have.
All right, you mentioned before the tire tracks that you observed?
Yes, sir, or tire impressions.
Tire impressions.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
Let's set the scene. Set the scene for us, if you would, please. Describing the grass, and we've heard a lot about, there's rain, but moisture. Describe the scene, if you would, on that grass.
So if you come into the property and you go down the dirt road with Paul on your left, as you see in the picture before y'all, that gravel or dirt road between the kennels and what's referred to as the airport or the airplane hangar eventually ends in grass, a large grass area that separates that hangar from another shed. And in that area is where Mr. Murdaugh's Suburban was parked with the flashers and the headlights were pointed towards Paul's body. But that entire area there is grass as opposed to the dirt or gravel lane between the two structures. And there's some very obvious at that time impressions in the grass, but they're not tracks like you think of that we could cast a track out of dirt, but you can't cast an impression that's laid over wet grass from the dew. I mean, you're not going to be able to do anything with that other than to document it. And I did notice them, and I actually asked Mr. Murdaugh if he could tell me, because I was unaware of the body cam footage at the time. Could you tell me what direction you came from? And he told me that he pointed and said he had come from the residence and pulled up here, turned around and went back the same route, confirming that the tracks around his vehicle, the Suburban, were his. And he said there should be two sets from where I arrived the first time, left and got the gun and came back. And I asked about the other sets that you could see. And there was one in particular that appeared to come close to Maggie's body, possibly. You had to have the light just right. And it just happened to be that I noticed it looking at the ground in front of Mr. Murdaugh's vehicle because the lights were shining on Paul that you could see that.
So the tire tracks, did you and Detective Rutland spend some time attempting to identify where those tracks could have come from?
We did try to follow them. One thing that started to bother me was that we didn't have a vehicle. We're trying to figure out how Maggie and Paul got to the kennels. It's a pretty substantial distance from the residence to the kennels, the property, and I don't know an exact, but I'm guessing, probably 1,000 yards from the kennels to the house. And it's 10 o'clock at night, so I don't know what time they got there, but it's a pretty long walk, especially if you're planning on walking back in the dark. And did they drive a vehicle? Did they drive a four-wheeler or a UTV or whatever, a golf cart? But we see Mr. Murdaugh's vehicle, and because he left it as instructed where it was. But we were trying to determine if any of these other tracks lined up with the position of any other vehicles that were on the property. There was a UTV with a flat tire. There was another a half-ton pickup in the shed across the grass portion from the hangar. I was thinking maybe those tracks would line up, or the impressions that were in the grass would line up with that vehicle.
Did they appear to line up with
They
either
did
of those
not.
vehicles?
They did not.
As part of your investigation, flash forward in just a little bit, did you operate and record 2 drone videos of the property?
I did.
And I'm going to show you hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 187 and 188. Briefly take a look at those 2 videos, DVDs if you would, and let me know if you recognize them.
Yes, sir. Both of these discs I have marked as having previously viewed and confirmed their authenticity, one on the 25th of this month and one on the 26th of this month.
And these would be the drone video recordings?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Your Honor, we would move to admit these into evidence, I believe, without objection.
Any objection?
I know, Your Honor.
You're admitted without objection, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a recess at this time. Please do not discuss it.
Please be seated.
You may bring the jury. All right, thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Captain Chapman, resuming our testimony, I'm going to show you a handful of pictures. I'm going to I've marked and I'm identifying. I ask you to please identify them.
No objection.
You offer them all into evidence?
I am.
They are admitted without objection.
Okay, permission to publish?
Yes.
Your Honor, I think we already established that the drone footage has been placed into evidence, and I would request permission to play that first, and then I'll go to the pictures. Sorry. Captain Chapman, as we were discussing earlier, you did describe the process of what you did with the drones and why you surveilled the area.
Took pictures with our drone just to give an overall. Some of the agents have different job descriptions that day. Some of my personnel had different job descriptions that day. In order to have something as a reference point to go back and work with later, we took the department issued drone and took a couple of aerial videos so that we could use them for reference later.
And Your Honor, request permission for the witness to sort of direct the geography of the drone footage. If you would please step down.
Sure.
And if you could identify for the jurors as the video is played what we're actually looking at. I appreciate it.
In the image currently, what we see is the main house, the Murdaugh residence.
And
left of that structure would be, between the trees would be the main driveway that comes out.
all right. If you could identify that on the video, the driveway that you're referring to.
Show you here, then I'll walk up. Yes, sir. So this would be the main structure and the main driveway that comes out from it with the trees. Ladies and gentlemen, the main structure, a residential structure, and the main driveway that comes away from it with the trees.
All right. And now looking down the road a bit, Captain Chapman, this road that veers to the left or turns left, what is that road?
So that would have been the route that was described by Mr. Murdaugh as how he left his residence and came to the dog kennels, coming up the road with the planted trees, making a left here, ladies and gentlemen, there. And if you play the video a little farther, that road ends at the incident location with the dog kennels.
And if you would, please describe for us what we're actually looking at with this dog kennel area, identifying the structures and the entry point for the road, the main mailbox area.
Absolutely. So this would be the area coming from the main residence. When we arrived on scene that night, or at least when I arrived, right here, positioned with the headlights facing down this way, would have been Mr. Murdaugh's vehicle. You keep hearing reference of the airplane hangar or the main shed. That would have been the large structure here. The dog kennels are the smaller one you see in the background that run perpendicular, and the driveway goes out to the road. Do I need to show you, ladies and gentlemen, here? Was everyone able to see?
Please do it. Just go through what these structures are.
So again, the roadway coming from the main residence. Here you have what's been referred to as the hangar. Mr. Murdaugh's vehicle is parked in this general area here with the headlight shining down this direction. This would have been the dog kennels. This is the large grass area that we were referring to when we're talking about the tire impressions in the dude. And this is a separate structure that sits off to the side.
And where would the entry point for the Moselle Road be on this just still shot?
Following straight down between the hangar and the dog kennels, going all the way through the tree line, the Moselle Road entrance would be back here.
All right, I'm going to just play it one time without stopping. All right, thank you, Captain Chapman. I'm going to play the second drone video. If you would, please tell us what we're looking at from this perspective right now.
Yes, sir. So this would be the back portion of the airplane hangar. The driveway, the vehicles at the bottom of the screen. This driveway goes back around and connects back to Moselle Road.
And is this the hangar that you were referencing?
This is the airplane hangar as we've been referring to it.
What is this structure on the top side of this image in the far back?
I believe that was a cleaning shed, for a processing shed for animals. If you were going to process a deer that you killed, it had like a walk-in freezer, sinks, floor with drain in it.
All right. Describe to us what we're looking at from this perspective, if you would.
Certainly. So if you came in the Moselle entrance, which was the entrance that we were dispatched to, the 4147, and you turned by the mailbox off of Moselle Road and you came in the dirt driveway, you would be coming up between the two structures. You have your airport or airplane hangar on your right with the red tin roof, the dog kennel on your left. That was the vehicle that Mr. Murdaugh was driving when, at least he said he was driving when I arrived on scene. At the time, the flashers were flat. I believe they actually still are in the drone video. The hazard lights are on all the way back from where dispatch initially advised him to cut them on for arrival. The large shed in the background out there is just simply another tractor shed.
And Captain Chapman, would you identify where the body of Paul Murdaugh was located when you arrived on
Yes, sir.
this picture?
So the dog kennels on the left of your screen, ladies and gentlemen, if you were to look towards the end of that structure, right where the gravel and the roof line are, and then step back approximately 5-6 feet, that would have been the location of Paul's body.
And where would Maggie's body be located?
And Maggie's body would have been just beyond the roof line of the red airplane hangar on the side closest to the Suburban.
The trajectory of the vehicle that Mr. Murdaugh was operating and actually left parked there, where would his headlights have been directed to?
As it sits now, which I believe is the same it was when I arrived on scene, the headlights were pointed on Paul's body.
And this structure just past the white roof, which is identified as the kennels, what's that run structure there?
I believe that was like a chicken coop or a chicken pen.
we were talking about the tire tracks that you noticed in the dew of the grass, that you were trying to identify the location of those tracks. As part of your investigation in conjunction with Detective Rutland, did you identify this black truck that we see pictured here?
We did.
Was the black truck, did any of the tracks line up to that black truck?
No, sir. That's what got us back to that location looking at the tire impressions, was that we were trying to determine if that was the vehicle we believed that Paul may have driven to the kennels.
And did you check the truck to see if it was physically warm to the touch or had been turned on?
It was not.
Pausing here, Captain Chapman, the kennel run, I think you already identified, is that the structure with the white roof?
Yes, sir.
The silverish white roof in the background on this image? And the feed room located where Paul actually was sort of straddled, where would that feed room be in this image?
If you look at the right corner of that building, and you can see the white frame door just above the red roof, that would be the area of the feed room.
And with the court's permission, I'd ask the witness to identify that on the screen, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. This would have been the area of the feed room here. This would have been the area of the feed room here.
And while you're there, Captain Chapman, would you please identify in this angle where Maggie Murdaugh would have been located?
Yes, sir. Maggie was in this area here. Here.
Did you become aware through the course of your investigation of footprints on the side of the hangar?
Yes.
How did that occur? What brought your attention to that first, and what did you do as a result?
Detective Rutland approached me at some point in time after her arrival with the search warrant that she had located a set of prints. The prints appeared to be a flat style print, like a flip-flop or a sandal of some type, and that they were to the left of this hangar door in the dirt underneath the left lean-to of the hangar.
And if you mean to the left of the door, in the image, do you identify an orange lawnmower there?
That's correct, in between that mower and the wall.
If you would, describe what you did and what you and Detective Rutland decided to do to examine these footprints.
She came over and alerted me to the presence of the footprints or shoe impressions. I went over with her. We started at the side of the hangar here that you see in the image by the orange mower. At that particular point, you could only see those sets of tracks or shoe impressions in the dirt. We then walked around the other side, and you could see that they were also on the other side of the hangar, the far side of that structure. So then we made the decision to walk a line off of those tracks from one end to the other to ensure that there was no evidence of firearms, blood, anything underneath that hangar along those shoe impressions, which we did not locate anything but the single set of shoe impressions. And they appear to go from one end of the hangar to the other, turn around and come back.
I'm going to show you what's been entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 193. Are you familiar with that location?
Yes, sir.
Is that a still image of the area between the hangar and that lawnmower?
It is, sir.
And is that the location where you notice the treads, the footprints?
It is, sir.
All right. handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 194. Could you please describe what you see in that picture?
This is a picture of the footprints along the edge of the hangar structure.
I'm handing you what's been marked and entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 195. Please describe what you see in that picture.
Again, another photograph depicting the shoe impressions along the edge of the
And
wall.
those are the shoe impressions that you personally viewed on scene at Murdaugh.
Yes, sir.
I'm also handing you what's been entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 200. Are you familiar with what that is a picture of?
These are the shoes that were on Miss Maggie at the time. I believe they're crime scene or autopsy photos from afterwards.
Rear view of the car operated by Mr. Murdaugh that night. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
And are those headlines directly aligned with where Paul's body would have been laid?
Yes, sir.
And from this perspective, where was Maggie's body located?
Close to the front of the Green Ranger, to the left of the vehicle.
And from which direction did Mr. Murdaugh indicate he drove to the scene from? Which direction would that have come from?
Bottom right-hand corner of the picture that you're seeing now.
Switch to Captain Chapman, I'm just asking you to identify just very quickly. These are stills from the video feed. What does that show?
That's the dirt road between the hangar and the dog kennels.
Okay, that would be State's Exhibit 192. This is State's Exhibit 191. And what does that show?
That's the, like we said, a cleaning shed, processing shed for animals, had a walk-in freezer, floor with a drain in it.
I'm showing you State's Exhibit 190. What is that image of?
Looks like the area, the first two kennels closest to the
Does that reflect the two kennels with the two dogs on either side closest to the feed room?
Closest to the feed room.
Okay. And I'm showing you what's marked as State's Exhibit 189.
That's the.
Is that another close-up of the water?
That's close-up of the water just outside the feed room.
And I'm referring to the pictures we just reviewed. This would be State's Exhibit 193. Is that where you physically walked with Detective Rutland?
It is, sir.
And to be clear, when you observed the footsteps in the sand there, were they the only footsteps present?
There was only one style of shoe impression when we first observed that went from one side of the hanger to the other and back. And it was that smooth style shoe impression.
And you say there and back, does that mean the footprints to you indicated they had walked one direction and then walked the opposite direction back? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, sir. We weren't able to tell at which side they entered initially, but they walked completely from one side of the hanger all the way underneath the lean-to the other side of the hanger, or turn around and come back.
I'm now showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 194. Describe the types of treads we're seeing in this picture, if you could.
Certainly. If you remember, I stated earlier that after locating the shoe impressions, Detective Rutland let me know that the impressions were there. I went over, we checked both sides and realized that they ran what we could tell with a flashlight from one side to the other. So we made the decision to walk straight through, keeping the shoe impressions that we were concerned about in between ourselves and the wall of the hanger structure, never crossing those actual shoe impressions. We went from one end to the other just to see if they were joined by any other shoe impressions, if there was any blood, if there were any weapons, so forth. We made one trip down and back, and we did not locate anything.
And I'm now showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 195. Would that be a close-up of these impressions that you observed?
It is, sir.
And specifically the items in the middle with the flat tread, those would those be the footprints that you noticed that night?
Those were the ones initially identified by Detective Rutland and pointed out to myself. The ones with the shoe impressions with the actual designs that would be left of those in this photograph, those are myself and Detective Rutland.
Published what's been marked as and entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 196 and 197. These are images of sensitive nature, have the cover sheet. I've advised counsel and our table to obscure the monitors. Showing you what's been marked and entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 196. Are you familiar with what this is an image of?
Yes, sir.
What does this show?
That's the lower portion of victim Maggie's body.
And specifically referring to the lower portion of her body, but her footwear. Are these the footwear that you observed on her that evening?
Those are they appear to be an accurate reflection of what she was wearing the night I was there.
Were you able to compare the general size and shape of those foot treads to the ones that you personally observed on the side of that hanger?
General impression. They are similar in nature and design and size. There were no measurements physically taken by myself or Detective Rutland.
Thank you. I'm publishing what's been marked and placed into evidence as State's Exhibit 197. And this is a similar photograph with just a slightly different angle. Is that the same treads and same footwear that you observed previously?
Again, what we believe that what we saw on the side of the building is a very close match as far as design and size as to those.
I'm showing you now what's been marked and placed into evidence as State's Exhibit 200. Are you familiar with that? I know you already described it, but tell us again what we're looking at.
Again, those were the shoes that were removed from victim Maggie's body at the scene, and the ones that we were visibly comparing the shoe impressions to.
Thank you. Okay. Let me turn the lights on. did you at one point have a be on the lookout or a bolo placed on any in particular in the vehicle that night?
Yes, sir. I believe I explained earlier that we had asked if anything was missing from the scene and trying to determine how Maggie and Paul got to the dog kennels. And after checking the F-150 that was in the picture that showed you earlier, the dark-colored F-150, and the Ranger had a flat tire, neither one of those matched up. I actually asked Mr. Murdaugh if he knew how they got down there, and he said he wasn't sure, but they should have driven Paul's truck, which was described as a white Ford F-250. We noticed that the truck wasn't there. It wasn't up until that point that Mr. Murdaugh, probably with everything going on, did not realize the truck wasn't there. And at that point in time, to our units at our agency, it was boloed out as possibly having been taken from the scene or removed from the scene.
And what happened? Were you able to locate the car eventually?
That was done sometime that night while we were on scene the very following morning, and I'd have to look back at notes to tell you exactly, but I believe it was around 10:30, 10:45 the next morning. That vehicle was located just inside Hampton County off of Highway 63.
Captain Chapman, referring back to the tire tracks, I know you spent some effort trying to identify the source and origin of those tire tracks. When you were attempting to investigate those tire tracks with Detective Rutland, did you have a chance to then observe Mr. Murdaugh's demeanor?
Yes, sir. And we discussed, there were changes at the time.
What kind of changes?
Again, he did appear very upset, heavy breathing, distraught. When we asked the specific questions in regards to the tire impressions and we began looking at the tire impressions, it was just a change. The breathing slowed and he began to watch us work more closely, sometimes out the corner of his eye. And after we moved away from that area with the tire impressions, the demeanor change returned back to upset.
Beg the court's indulgence. No further questions from the state. Thank you, Captain Chapman.
Sir.
Captain, my name is Dick Harpoogan. I don't think we've met before.
No, sir.
I represent Alex Murdaugh. And let me ask you a couple questions. One, and let me deal with these in a different order.
Sure.
But you indicated that if Mr. Murdaugh had taken the pulse tried to take the pulse of his dead son on his neck, or his wrists were under him, did he indicate to you he had tried to roll his son over?
To me, no, sir. He did not.
Okay, tried to move him at all. Secondly, if he did get blood on his fingers or hands, were you aware that there was blood found on his shorts?
I was not, sir. Again, I was asked only about my visible observations and just did not see anything at the time.
Right, nothing on his shirt that
No,
would
sir.
indicate. Okay.
And I was unaware that anything was found.
But you're not saying that you didn't see anything that would confirm, but he didn't smear
That's
blood on
correct.
himself. Right.
That is correct.
But you're not saying that you have evidence he didn't try to check the pulse of his dead son?
I am not. No, sir.
Okay. So, and I think you indicated that his his demeanor was consistent with somebody who had just found his wife and son butchered.
His demeanor upon my arrival and initial conversation with him was one of someone who was upset.
Okay, now let's talk. Just a moment ago, you said something about when you started looking at the tire tracks on the grass, in the grass.
It was a change of demeanor, yes, sir.
Well, a change of demeanor that perhaps he thought you had some evidence that would point to the killer of his wife and child?
Are you asking me if that was the change?
Was the demeanor consistent with that?
It was simply a change in demeanor.
Right.
And could it be?
Yes.
Sure, it absolutely could be. It was just a noted change in demeanor.
His interest
Exactly.
perked up. Right.
Yes, sir.
You were over there looking at tire tracks, and perhaps you had discovered a different car or a different tire track, and did you follow all those tire tracks?
We attempted to follow out everything we could. As mentioned earlier, it was just impressions, dew impressions, wet impressions, not actual tracks.
Did you take pictures?
By the time that we did that, the rain started and SLED's crime scene was arrived. Again, we were rushing against the weather. The images, I believe we discussed earlier, were the only ones captured by body cam.
Right.
And
it's the body cam is not.
Our focus at the time was to secure the largest items of evidence that were identifiable to make sure that the weather didn't damage them. And by that time, SLED's team was on scene.
Okay, and now there was two other sets of tracks, one of them coming out of the shed, and I believe your notes indicate that was the caretaker or the caretakers. Now, was that the caretaker that took care of the dogs or somebody else?
There was a set of tire tracks or impressions that went through the dirt underneath the hangar,
Right.
lean-to. Initially, we didn't know whose they were, what vehicle had left those tracks. In the drone footage, you can actually see the agent still processing those. Believed that later, I was told that they matched the tire tracks of someone that came to take care of the dogs.
Okay. Now, we heard from the fire chief a little while ago. Were you here in the courtroom when he
No,
testified?
sir, I was not.
Okay. He indicated that there were, on the road that led out to the Moselle Highway, you know where I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
You know, could we put the drone? Wait a minute. You do that? Email.
Overview of the house and camera.
What now?
Overview of the house and camera.
I think I like this second. Well, no, go ahead and give me the first one. It may be in there. Okay, so were you informed that the chief of police had found some tire tracks on the road leading in or out to the Moselle Highway behind? And if you look at the screen, this road where the cars are parked on either side of the road, that is that road, correct?
For clarification, the chief of the fire department or chief of the police department?
I'm sorry, chief of the fire department.
Just want to make sure I was answering correctly, sir.
Yes.
Yes, I was not made aware by Chief McRoy of anything back there, but it doesn't mean that he didn't see something.
He apparently informed your deputies of that. They never communicated that to you?
I was not made aware of any tire impressions of potential evidence down that driveway.
And I think Sergeant Green?
Yes, sir.
Indicated that it was communicated to him by the fire chief. Were you aware of that?
I was not, sir.
Until I just said it, you were not aware of that?
I was not made aware of anything that they believe was a possible extension of the scene that went down that driveway. No, sir, I wasn't.
If the fire chief had seen, and he's testified he saw distinct tire tracks on that road. He thought it had some evidentiary value. He's not a police officer. Had you been made aware of them, would you have taken photographs, or I guess they don't use plaster casts anymore.
We still do. Yes, sir. I would have done my best to preserve it, whether that meant photographic form or protection by other means from the approach, and whether I would have.
Okay, so go ahead and let that run for a minute. I may want to stop it and deal with another issue. Okay, stop it right there. Okay, yeah, right there's good. Now, if you'll watch where I'm pointing to.
Yes, sir.
These are that's the dog shed right there, right?
That is correct, sir.
And right around in here would have been where Paul's body was.
Close to the end of that structure,
Right.
yes, sir.
And Maggie's body would have been on which side of Alex's car?
The end of the red roof on the driver's side.
Right. Now, are you aware that he discovered the bodies, called 911, drove back up to the house, and then came back down?
From listening to his statement and from the 911 call, I was aware of it.
And
Yes.
I mean, he went and got a shotgun, came back.
Yes, sir.
And the shotgun was there, which sort of corroborates his statement, right?
I was made aware of that, yes, sir. That Sergeant Green took the shotgun from him upon his arrival and secured it.
And you can also hear the seatbelt dinging going on as he drives away, can you not?
You can hear that in the background of the 911 call.
Right. So this is where he came back, not necessarily when he pulled up to begin with, correct?
My understanding that is the way the vehicle was when he returned. And the initial officers arrived on scene.
Right. So you don't know where the car was positioned. We first came down and discovered Maggie's body and Paul's body, correct?
My knowledge to it would be limited to his description of having taken a very similar route back to the house.
Right.
But close but not exact, yes, sir.
Now, what is this green hedge or whatever?
If I'm not mistaken, it was a grapevine, but the structure on the other side of it, a chicken coop.
Okay. And you remember how tall that grapevine was?
I don't know exactly, but looking at the image, it's fairly tall.
10 feet?
I would say at least.
At least. Now, if you were at the house, looking down this way, there's some pine trees between this area and the house?
There are, sir.
And then there's, if you're trying to look at the dog pens, there's obviously a 10-foot at least, what'd you call it?
The kennels?
No, the vine.
Grapevines?
Grapevine.
Yes, sir.
10 feet tall. So you could not see from the house the dog kennel because of the pine trees and the grapevine, correct?
I would venture to say you could not see the position of Paul or Maggie's body from the house.
At night?
At night.
Right. And this is not a well-lit area down here, is it?
I don't recall it being extremely well lit, no, sir. There was some artificial light, but I wouldn't call it extremely well lit.
Okay. So go ahead and continue running the video, please. And this was on the next morning?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Keep going. Okay, stop. That black truck, whose black truck is that?
That's the vehicle that we checked that evening that I believe was titled as a farm truck, just around the farm truck.
And is that the one you checked to see if it had been driven lately?
That's the one that Detective Rutland and I looked to see if those wet tire impressions matched up to the position of that vehicle when we arrived. Those particular impressions did not, and the vehicle was not warm to the touch.
Okay, but that would have been the previous night?
The night of the incident, when
Right.
we arrived, yes, sir.
The night prior to this. But that could Paul have driven that truck down there?
It would depend on what time he drove the truck down there, but the impressions that we were looking at, that we referenced when asked earlier by the Assistant Attorney General, they did not come to the back of that vehicle. They didn't come from that vehicle. Did he drive that vehicle to the scene? I can't tell you that, yes or no, but the impressions that she and I were looking at did not match the position of that vehicle.
Right.
Yes, sir.
But Paul earlier could have driven that down there.
He could. It's very feasible he could have driven anything out there that night or earlier in that day, but just not that vehicle for those particular set of impressions.
Okay, go ahead. Okay. Back that up just a little bit, please. Back it up a little bit more. Back it up a little bit more. Back it up. Okay, let it run. Now, stop. So the tracks that you found from the caretaker, where were they?
In the image that you're looking at now, ladies and gentlemen, they would have been to the right of the open door in the center, underneath that large lean-to section. So the right
Could you
side
come
of it.
down here and point it out for me?
Your Honor, may I?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. This section, you can actually see the agent's feet there where she's still actually processing.
Okay. Were there any other tire tracks? Any other tire tracks? Go ahead and take it.
Thank you, sir.
That y'all processed other than those tire tracks?
To my knowledge, that was the only set that they actually, I believe the only set that they actually processed. By then, the only one left that wasn't damaged by weather as well.
Okay. Go ahead. Keep going. Stop. So, and this road here goes out to Moselle Highway, right?
If you were to take the right T there
Yep.
by the silver trucks,
Yep.
if you took the right, that would go out to Moselle Road. The left just loops around the airplane hangar.
Okay. And if the fire chief had indicated there were tire impressions back here in the dirt, you would have taken pictures or gotten plastic cast or something, right?
If I had been made aware that there was something there that someone thought may possibly be evidence, I would have done my best to secure it, but I was not made aware of any of that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Keep going. Okay, I'm done with this one. Can you put the other one up, please? That's the main house, the white building there.
Yes, sir. The Murdaugh residence.
Keep going. While that's running, you would come down that driveway, take a left at that road, stop. And that if you kept going straight, you hit the Moselle Highway, right?
If you continued straight out the driveway with the planted trees on either side, that would be a separate entrance from the the farm entrance.
Right.
It would have been the main entrance to the residence itself, off of Moselle Road.
Right, the main entrance to come to the residence.
That's correct.
If you're going to the residence, you come in that entrance.
That is
If
correct.
you're going down to the dog pens, that area, the farm area, you take the entrance with the
I would assume so.
the post office box on it. Okay. Go ahead. And that's actually all I need out of it. Thank you. Let me ask you a few more questions. If I could see. The photos of the footwear, I think the flip-flops or whatever. In one of your reports, you described that as it looked to you like someone had been pacing. Is that correct?
I did describe it as pacing, I believe.
Is that accurate?
Simply because it goes down, turns around, and comes back. It doesn't appear to veer off anywhere in between. And there's nothing, it doesn't start anywhere in particular, and anywhere in particular. It goes all the way across, turns around, and comes all the way back.
Okay, and the pictures that, and I'm going to look at them here. Could I have those? The pictures that were put into evidence a moment ago. Can I use the Elmo, please? Right. Okay. I can't see this. Huh. Where's the? Is that more? So there's two. No, let me see. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. This is 195. See, are there other pictures in there? Yeah, no, this one. So as we see in this picture, there you go. Yeah, that's good. We see these flat marks, right? That would be the flip-flops.
The impressions we were following, yes, sir.
Yes. So they're like right here and here and here, and in some instances, these look like, actually, we blew one up and it's got an REI symbol in the middle of them. And they're, in at least one instance, over the flip-flop. Who's that?
The only prints that I'm aware of that we could see that night without blowing anything up was the image of the flat shoe wear that you see, and then what Detective Rutland and myself were wearing when we crossed through.
Well, were you wearing, that's fine, like, I mean, is this y'all? Would you have walked over there or here?
Presumably so, because those images weren't there prior to us walking through. I don't remember exactly what shoe style Detective Rutland was wearing and myself, but.
So, let me put this one up. Like this, okay. Again, you can see the pattern of flip-flops, but you also see these patterned boots or shoes over the flip-flops. Are you telling me those were not there the night before, or you couldn't see them?
No, sir. What I'm telling you is when Detective Rutland and I first observed those impressions, it was nothing but a smooth, small, flip-flop style impression. Went down from one end, all across underneath the hanger, all the way to the other, turned around and came back, which is the reason that I referenced it as being a pace. Had it simply crossed underneath, I would have just said crossed underneath. But those were the only impressions. Then she and I walked down the shed, keeping those shoe impressions between us and the wall without stepping on them.
So those are not, I'm sorry.
But we did not photograph them. That information from that point was relayed to crime scene because we had not done any photographs of all at all at that point. We were waiting on crime scene. So anything else that came through after that would presumably be crime scene that would have come and taken a look at the impressions, not us.
I'm trying to get two issues. First issue,
Certainly.
were those patterned shoe prints there the night before when you walked through?
The only print there were the flat, smooth ones.
So those, I'm not trying to belabor it.
I'm sorry.
So those pattern prints came after you saw them the night before?
Correct. The
Okay.
only impressions were the flat, smooth
Okay.
ones.
And you left and turned it over to SLED to process the scene?
While we were there, again, that was at some point in time while we were there that evening. I didn't leave until like 10 o'clock the next morning. At some point in time, that information was relayed so that they could photograph it. And I don't know whose prints those are. I would assume that they would have been agents that came down behind us and photographed or collected or did whatever.
So we were talking about crime scene integrity earlier.
Yes, sir.
Those aren't your footprints, correct?
The ones that are, there is a set that would be myself and Detective Rutland's,
But
but
not
they're
the
not
ones-
going to cross over
Right,
any of
they're
them.
not, the
That's
prints that
correct.
cross over, they're not your prints.
No, sir. If it crossed over one of theirs, it's not mine.
Okay. Who took this picture, do you know?
I do not know.
But it was taken, you think, the next day?
It was taken relatively soon afterwards because it still shows the smooth prints. So it was either taken upon daylight, because again, we didn't leave until like 10 o'clock.
Right.
So I don't actually know.
So is this best practices to walk over evidence before you photograph it?
Can't say that because it wasn't myself or my detective that did that.
I'm just saying, you
If they were doing so while processing or while collecting, then and inadvertently stepped on one, it's okay because they have other ones to use. But, I'm sure that you would have to probably ask the person that stepped on them and took the photographs.
If one of your detectives had done this, you would not be happy, correct?
I wouldn't be happy, no, sir.
Okay.
Not unless it was done after it was processed and for a reason.
Well, these are the crime scene photographs taken by, we think, SLED, or Solicitor Duffy Stone took some pictures the next day.
Sure.
One of some agency other than yours, but certainly nobody ought to be walking across this stuff, right?
No, again, like I said, they weren't like that when
Okay.
we were there, sir.
Let me then go to one of the other pictures you were showing a moment ago. This water,
Yes, sir.
these pictures taken of the water, do you know when they were taken? I'm sorry. 189, 190. Do you know when they were taken?
I know they were taken that evening, sir, but I'm not sure if you're looking at stills off of a body cam or an actual crime scene photograph. So I don't know exactly when, but they were taken that evening, obviously.
In this picture right here, water seems to be coming from the pen, right? From the dog pen?
It appears so, yes, sir.
And there's two full two full pails of water there for the dogs, right?
In the picture, absolutely.
Okay. And then there's some additional water and this is 189, that I'm not quite sure where that is, but that's consistent with the water you saw that night, right?
Yeah, the water that I saw that night and it was captured very well on Sergeant Green's body-worn camera. Came out of the first two kennels,
Right.
traveled down a short distance, and then over to where, at the time, Paul's body was laid.
So the water that was around Paul came out of the kennels, correct?
I don't know if that's where it came from, but it did come from that direction. There was, and I did not see a hose or a jug or anything else, but it did tail from those first two kennels down to where Paul's body was.
Okay. Now, let me, this is an item under seal. 196. Keep going. Okay, stop. No, this word, take it back down. Okay, a little bit more. Take it back down a little bit more. Okay, stop. This was introduced to show what shoes she had on, right?
Previously,
Yes.
yes, sir, it was.
Now, on the back of her leg, right here, did you that night look at that dirt?
I did.
Did you see a footwear impression, partial footwear impression in that dirt?
I saw what could very well be a impression.
As if somebody put their foot on the back of her leg.
It was something out of mud that very well could have been a shoe impression.
On the back of her leg.
On the
As
back
they
of her
put
leg.
their foot on the back of her leg. Do you know what analysis, if any, was done by SLED or any other law enforcement agency to determine if that was a shoe impression, and if so, what kind of shoe? Do you know?
I do not know, sir.
Okay. Thank you. You can turn the lights on, and I'll turn. How do I turn this on? Like that. Okay. Okay. So, let me ask you, I got just a couple more questions, maybe.
Sure.
So, okay, so when you left that night for that early the next morning, had you come to a conclusion as to any suspect?
Had I come, no, sir.
Okay, are you aware that the next day, the next morning, that your department issued a statement that said, at this time, there is no danger to the public. If information is received that dictates otherwise, we immediately notify the public. Are you aware of that?
The Colleton County Sheriff's Office issued that?
Colleton County Sheriff's Department, yes.
I'm unaware. No, sir.
Let me hand this article up to you. From the Post and Courier.
Non-objection, I haven't seen this. I'm not familiar with anything council's referencing.
Now let's stand for a moment. Okay.
Opportunity to look at that article.
Media article. Question posed was whether he was familiar with the statement made. He said no. The media article contains all sorts of information not in the record and not.
I haven't heard any exhibit being offered into evidence.
Your Honor, I offer into evidence the Post and Courier story of June 8th, the next morning, 2021, which contains the quote, which I've just read.
In any case, he's not familiar with that.
So, was there a danger to the public the next morning? Were you afraid that some serial killer was out there with a shotgun and AR type weapon?
I can't effectively answer whether or not there's a danger to the public when I don't have all the pieces to the puzzle. I am fairly certain that statement wasn't issued by us, and the reason I can state that is because we were not primary, and it is a big no-no for us to issue anything when we're not the primary body. So where that information came from, I'm unaware, and it was never asked for me to approve to send to the sheriff. It would have never came from us.
If that statement had run, as it did in the Post and Courier on the 8th, would the Sheriff's Department have pushed back on that and said that's not accurate? There'd be a subsequent story I haven't seen?
I wouldn't have. I can't state that. The only thing I could tell you that when I left that morning, I didn't have any information that proved one thing or the other.
So when you left that morning, was Alec Murdaugh a suspect in the killing of his wife and son?
When I left that morning, I wasn't the primary investigator.
Who was?
That would have been SLED.
So you gave the whole case went to SLED?
The whole case went to SLED. We were an assisting body at that time.
And you were never consulted after that by SLED?
I was not consulted in the sense that anything was provided to me. We have assisted. I have stored vehicles. I have stored property for them. I have stood by while they executed search warrants. But it was not in a manner in which the information or knowledge they had on the case was shared with me. It was the exact opposite.
On the night of the murders, did your department obtain a search warrant?
We did, sir.
For all the property, the house, all of it?
It was obtained for the entire 1,700-acre property.
Including the house?
Including the house.
And was that executed?
It was executed beginning at the dog kennels at the primary scene.
But did you go to the house?
I did not.
Did your department?
We did not.
Who actually executed the search warrant?
The search warrant was provided that evening to crime scene, which is standard protocol. When they come, they're going to ask for it. We have to show it. SLED's crime scene.
Okay.
It was given to them. And we stayed, myself and several of my detectives. Several were sent home so they could come in the next morning. And we stayed and assisted. I didn't leave till 9 or 10 o'clock the next morning.
Did you go in the residence?
But no, sir. The drone footage that you saw was the last thing I did at that scene that morning, and then I left and went home.
What about that night? When was the search warrant executed that night?
After that incident there, or that search warrant was executed, I did come back later that day and did a walk around of the property that we've been discussing all afternoon. Right. I have never been to the main house.
Never been in?
I have not been in the main house. Not during this incident or any other incident.
Did someone from your department go in the main house?
Not that I'm aware of. It wouldn't have been, not as an investigator. Let's put that. None of my detectives went over there under my direction.
So you gave the search warrant to SLED, to crime scene people?
Yes, sir.
That gave them the authority to go in the house, correct?
It was signed off on to cover the 1,700 acres.
Right, but I'm specifically talking about the residence.
Any structure.
They could have gone in the residence. They could have taken all his clothes to check if they wanted, right?
They could have. I don't know that they didn't.
Well, we're going to talk about that later on. They could have You're familiar with trace evidence, many cases where they check showers or the sinks to see if there's trace evidence of blood, right?
Am I? Yes, sir.
Yes. And do you know whether they did that or not?
I do not, again.
Do you know that you can, with the appropriate technology, use look at microscopic evidence, see whether it be blood or tissue, or if somebody tried to wash something, you can actually still, in a washed piece of clothing, detect blood or detect tissue, even after it's been washed. You aware of that?
Am I aware of that? Yes, I am.
Do you know whether SLED did that?
I do not, again.
But they could have that night done all of those things under that search warrant.
Presumably so, and I'm not saying they didn't. Again, Mr. Harper.
Well, right, but they could have. I'm not saying they didn't either. We're going to find out.
Sure.
But under the search warrant your department obtained, they had the authority to go in the house, any of the buildings, anywhere on that property, and look for guns, evidence of any sort of crime, evidence of, again, in the shower, in the sinks, trace evidence. They had the authority to do that.
To answer your question, as long as they stay within the scope of the actual warrant that was signed, I don't have that search warrant, and Detective Rutland is the one that actually got it. If they stay within the scope of that search warrant, and they're only searching inside that scope, they had the ability to search structures, vehicles, only 1,700 acres, as long as they're within the scope.
We'll hear from Detective Rutland tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
And I'll ask her these questions.
Thank you, sir.
Having said that, Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
Captain Chapman, the footsteps that you noticed, I know we've been through quite a bit of it, but counsel raised this issue. The path you followed, were they consistent with someone who, with a person who started back beyond this area, and then where did they go from there? I'm asking where they went. Where did they originate? Where did they go to? And where did they end?
The objection is sustained as to the form of the question.
Thank you. If you could, please explain to us where in your estimation, having traced the tracks, where they originated from, where they ultimately went to, and where they ended up.
The shoe impressions crossed completely from one side all the way to the other, with the building to the right, going down, coming back the opposite direction. The only reason I can say that we're fairly certain that it started from the grass side and went through, turned around, and came back is because we never saw any impressions similar to that running beyond the airport hangar on the back side.
And the location, where in reference to where these footprints ended, ultimately, and where Maggie's body is located. How did that line up? Describe that how they lined up.
If you take a step back from there, to the right of that image would have been on the opposite side of the hangar door, would have been Maggie's body.
Referencing State's Exhibit 190. Captain Chapman, do you notice blood marks here in the water?
Objection, Your Honor.
The objection is sustained.
Thank you.
Did you observe blood marks in the water when you were there that evening?
calling for speculation.
Pardon?
He is calling for speculation as to what discoloration in the water, if there is any, caused by.
I'll lay more of a foundation, Your Honor. Captain Chapman, were you familiar with the scene as this picture depicts?
Yes, sir.
Did you personally view what this picture depicts?
I did.
Are you familiar with the discoloration, and did you observe the discoloration in this photograph on two different areas?
I did see that.
Was that discoloration, in your opinion, consistent?
Objection. He's not been qualified to give an opinion about this matter.
I didn't hear the complete question.
In your estimation, and
Your Honor, objection, and if he's going to pursue this frivolous line of questioning, I'd ask the jury be excused. No evidence whatsoever.
Objection is overruled. Let's pose the question.
in your experience and observation, having observed the scene and all the matter that was there, were those lines in the water consistent with blood?
Objection.
Objection sustained.
Thank you.
I don't need to be thanked for any ruling.
No, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Expressing my gratitude is improper. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I'll ask just one last question and I understand the court's ruling. Captain Chapman, are the substance there that you identified as having observed, are they in a straight line? Are they in straight lines?
Yes.
Thank you,
Your Honor,
court's
I'd like to
indulgence.
make a motion to strike his questions about blood from the record and the jury be instructed to disregard those questions.
I've informed the jury that they're to disregard any question when I sustain the objection. They were previously instructed on that.
Yes, thanks.
Yes. Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any further
No, Your Honor.
cross-examination? Thanks, sir. You may step down. If you would turn the lights up, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this day. Thank you all very much. We'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Have a good evening. Please remember you're not to discuss the case with anyone or allow anyone to discuss it in your presence, nor are you to engage in any or be exposed to any other information other than what you have received in the courtroom and will receive in the courtroom. Have a good evening. Anything else before we leave for the day? We're in recess till 9:30 tomorrow morning.